Kelsey, in the library, what's the one kind of story that we get asked for almost on a daily basis?
I'd probably have to say a good mystery.
Absolutely. And yet that can mean so many different things to readers.
So prior to my arrival here at the Sioux City Public Library, Open Book Club read Alan Eskens' debut novel, The Life We Bury. Since then, his writing and books have popped up in our book discussions on multiple occasions. So much so that I knew I had to carve out time to read one, which turned into many. I get it now. Our patrons appreciate mysteries with intricate plots and authentic, complex characters, and each one of Alan's mysteries delivers that in spades.
Alan Eskens is the best-selling author of The Life We Bury, The Guise of Another, The Heavens May Fall, The Deep Dark Descending, The Shadows We Hide, Nothing More Dangerous, and The Stolen Hours. He is the recipient of the Barry Award, Minnesota Book Award, Rosebud Award, and Silver Falchion Award.
Alan has a journalism degree from the University of Minnesota and a law degree from Hamline University. After law school, he studied creative writing in the MFA program at Minnesota State University Mankato. Alan grew up in the hills of central Missouri. He now lives with his wife Jolie in Greater Minnesota, where he recently retired after practicing criminal law for 25 years. Welcome to the first 50 pages, Alan.
I am currently just about 50 pages into Nothing More Dangerous. And one of the things that I have picked up through the story is the secondary characters, you lead us to want to know more about them. Mm-hmm. Like, there's something more interesting about this person's life.
I hope so.
Yeah.
And that's really kind of the springboard for how I take a secondary character and move on with them to make them a main character. Is when I write a novel, I'm one of those people that will do biographies for my characters. And the exercise of doing the biography is really secondary because the biography is already in my head. When I write a character, I know as much about them as I can, where they grew up, who their parents were, what their home life was like, because the more I know about them, the more I know how they're going to act and react within a scene. And also the more I know about them, the more rounded I can make their character in a story.
I guess personally, like as one of your readers, I love that you do that because I feel like a lot of other authors, you fall in love with these secondary characters, but you don't necessarily get the chance to learn more about them.
Everybody, it feels like they are the main character in their life's story, but all the people around them have their own life story that is hidden. That as an author, I want to look at that person and say, I'm going to tell your story now. I'm bringing this out to the world. If you've read The Life We Bury and then you read The Stolen Hours, you will see Lila's backstory from two different points in time, in two different perspectives, because the first perspective is Joe learning about her backstory. The Stolen Hours is the reader now learning the true depth of that backstory. So there is a depth to it if you read them in order, but they're standalone, so you don't have to.
Well, you basically answered my next question because since I'm in the middle of Nothing More Dangerous, now my question is, how would you recommend that we read your books? So basically what I'm hearing is start with The Life We Bury. But if you don't start with The Life We Bury, go back and read The Life We Bury before you read the other ones. And it sounds like you don't have to read these novels in order of their publication date.
That is correct. You don't have to. If you do, it's a richer experience. I have on my website, alaneskens.com, kind of instructions on how to read my books. It's just kind of a map because this does come up. People, they don't know where to start and whether they have to read from the beginning, but you really don't. And Nothing More Dangerous, which is the prequel, that's a true standalone. The character is Bodhi Sandon, who this is his story when he was 15 years old back in 1976. In The Life We Bury, he's a grown-up. He's an adult professor, law professor. And so when you read the Nothing More Dangerous, you understand what made Bodhi, but it's really my most true standalone novel.
Well, since we're talking about Nothing More Dangerous, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. And, this is a story that focuses on racism and combating prejudices from where, you grow up. And you don't shy away from writing challenging and issue-oriented storylines. The Kirkus Review's starred review, called The Stolen Hours, which was your next book, right? A rousing legal thriller that's also an acute study of female victimization and male privilege. So, you definitely dive into challenging subjects in your writing. You've mentioned that Nothing More Dangerous in a previous interview took you many years to complete. I'm curious, could you talk about how the story or your perspectives change for you over the course of the time that you were writing the book?
So in 1992, I just gotten out of law school, and this is that eureka moment when I realized that I wanted to try writing something. So I wrote a short story about a 15-year-old boy, and I liked the story that I wrote, but I didn't know anything about writing. So I started reading these books, like I said, and I started adding to this short story, making it longer and longer. And pretty soon I had a full-length manuscript. And I worked on that manuscript for 20 years. That was my learning manuscript. Every time I took a class, I would come home and try and incorporate what I learned into this manuscript. And after 20 years, it was not ready. It was a jumble of things. So I put it aside, wrote The Life We Bury, wrote the 3 books for Max Rupert, wrote The Shadows We Hide. Then I went back, and without looking at that previous manuscript, I knew this story backward and forward because I'd been working on it for 20 years. I outlined it and wrote it from scratch. And I wrote it from scratch because I didn't want my previous mistakes to impede me. Sometimes you look at a page or a paragraph and you think that's good and you move on, when really what you should do is look at it and say, is it really good? Is that the best I can do? And so by writing it from scratch, I wasn't settling on things that I had written back when I wasn't as good of a writer as I believe I am today. So I rewrote it, and it was a story that was very personal to me. It was the arc of a young man, 15 years old, who believes that he doesn't have a prejudiced bone in his body. However, he grows up in a society, in a world, mid to southern Missouri in the 1970s, that you can't help but be swayed by the community around you, the society around you. And when a Black family moves in across the road from him, he starts to see the world through the eyes of this Black boy who he befriended, who lived across the road from him. And he starts to see how all these things that he thought were harmless and no big deal, and that they weren't prejudiced, were, at the end of the day, they were based on racism. And so it is a mystery. There's a lot of moving parts to that novel. There's a mentor character named Hoke who lives next door, who has his own wonderful backstory that really takes over the last third of the novel. But it was a joy to finally see that come to print and be put in stores.
You've talked a little bit about your writing process and your writing style.
So of course, we kind of want to dive a little bit more into that. Are there strategies that you've found that work best for you? You talk about outlining a lot. Would you mind kind of sharing a little bit more about that?
For someone who is starting out as a writer, whether you think you should or not, you should. Because if you sit down and you have this roadmap already there, now you can just go back and rely upon your techniques. So you have the roadmap, that's your outline. Now you're going to drive the drive. You're going to describe what you see, and you're going to give the emotion and all that as you're driving. And you use your craft and technique to make really wonderful paragraphs and chapters. And you don't have to worry about what happens next, because you know what happens next. And as you're driving that drive, if something comes to you and think, that might be a better way to go, I step back and I say, okay, if I do this turn here that's not in my outline, how is that going to affect everything? So I re-outline with that new turn in there to see where the ripples hit. And if I like it better, I make that change. So I'm not wedded to my outline, but it is a comfort to have that there as you're writing.
Up to this point in your writing career, have published about one book each year, Would you say that's about right? Like,
Yeah, one book. With the exception of last year, I didn't have a book come out, which was with COVID. It was probably a good year to skip, but yeah, one book a year since 2014,
Wow.
except for last year.
being in the library, we see lots of authors who churn out lots of books. And kind of the feedback that we get from readers is that their stories become diluted and that they're not as good. They don't enjoy them as much. Do you
I
think
think
that
that's
just being able to focus on that one book a year that you're doing gives you a better product overall?
I don't want to say it's a better product compared to others, but at the same time, it's very important to me that I don't want to do more than one a year simply because this goes back to theater. Um, in theater, I studied improv. And one of the things about improv is coming up with the more creative idea. So your first thought out of the gate is usually something that everybody thinks of. Second idea, same thing. Third, you're getting a little more creative. When you get to the fourth, fifth, sixth level of ideas, now this is stuff that is new. It's stuff that hasn't been done before. And as I'm writing, I don't want to rush myself because what'll happen is I will put down the first thing that comes to my head, which is usually not the most creative or evocative way of doing it. So by giving myself that year of time, I can focus on paragraphs and chapters for a while, and take my time with it. And that works for me.
And that's what readers want, right? Like good mystery readers, they want memorable reads.
And the thing about mysteries and thrillers and action is a lot of people think that what they want is the twists and turns in the action. But they don't realize that the reason the twists and the turns in the action are memorable and important was because the characters really meant something to them. And to give an example, Die Hard, the first Die Hard movie,
Yeah.
I loved it. I thought it was great. Second, third, fourth, I don't know how they focused on the action. If you go back and look at the first Die Hard was a love story. And it was a guy who was just a normal Joe overcoming tremendous crucible to save his wife. Again, sorry, spoiler alert if you haven't seen Die Hard.
Who hasn't seen Die Hard?
Yeah.
But the reason that the sequels never matched the original was because they shifted from the love story and the character story to just action. And that was a mistake. And so I don't want to make that mistake where my twists and turns are the thing that I want you to, that I think are the most important, because if you don't care about the characters, you're not going to care if my protagonist gets into a fight. I was actually reading a novel, and the protagonist got into a fight, and I found myself saying, I just hope you die because I don't care about you. And it would make this story so much better if you lost this fight. But yeah, you need to care about the characters, otherwise none of the rest of it matters.
And we've kind of touched on Lila briefly, but for readers who might not be familiar with her story, could you tell us a little bit about her and your latest book, The Stolen Hours?
Sure. So in The Life We Bury, she is Joe Talbert's neighbor. They're both in college. And Joe wants to date her, but she is standoffish. She doesn't want to date him. But the reason she doesn't want to date him isn't because she doesn't like him. It's because something happened to her in her past, and she has built a wall. And that trauma that happened to her in her past is examined further in the sequel, The Shadows We Hide. But again, both of those novels, Lila is a secondary character, and you see this event, this trauma that happened to her in her past through Joe's perception of it. Now in The Stolen Hours, we get to see it through her perspective. And it's about her finally finding the strength to look into what happened to her when she was in high school and trying to find the person that harmed her. And so it's about her, the character story is about her uncovering what happened to her. the thriller story is she is out of law school. She's taken the bar exam. She's waiting for her results. She's working as a Hennepin County assistant attorney prosecuting cases in Minneapolis. Now, as she hasn't passed the bar yet, she's not officially an attorney, but she's working with another attorney supervisor, and a case crosses her path that catches her attention and affects her, and she digs into that case, and she wants to bring this person to justice, and it all ties into what happened to her in her past.
And Lila is your first female protagonist. How is writing her story in The Stolen Hours different from the other mystery novels that you've written?
Scary. I have read female protagonists written by male authors that I thought were atrocious. And I'm sure women thought they were atrocious. And so I wanted to not make those kind of mistakes. So I spent a couple of years reading a steady diet of good female writers writing good female protagonists. And then I would throw in every now and again a male writer writing a female protagonist to compare and see, what the differences were. And I wanted very much not to make those mistakes that I saw other male authors doing. And that Kirkus review that you read, that is the kind of thing that really validates that effort. When they talk about, I've created a story with a lot of important female, I can't remember the words.
A rousing legal thriller that's also an acute study of female victimization and male privilege. And we've talked before, Kirkus is rough.
Yeah. So when you get a glowing review from them, or like they really like dig into like what you're trying to get across, then it's like, yes.
Yeah. And when I read that review, it's like, good, they saw what I was trying to do. I was trying to show this from as if I were a woman writing this story. And I did my best to delve into a woman's shoes before taking this on.
And I think it's really interesting and really cool that you have, not only written Lila in such a way that, she's very powerful for readers, but that you have this like secondary cast of strong female characters within the story, that you have Detective Vang and Prosecutor Andy Fitch, and, that there's just these other strong female women within the story as well, that we don't just have the protagonist, but we have, strong female secondary characters as well.
And one of the things that I saw some male authors do is they would have a really good female character, but in the end, a male would save them, or it would be, a male mentor, or somehow it was the man who stepped in and took care of things. And I was going to avoid that with every ounce of my being. So I even go so far as to have Joe Talbert, Lila's boyfriend, get called away on an assignment, so he's not even in town for part of the novel, because I don't. If he's there, the reader's going to want him to step in and help, or some readers are. I don't want that. This is Lila's story, and this is Lila's the hero here.
So we've kind of touched on how you approach, when you wanted to start writing Lila as a female character, that you did a ton of like reading to really like study up and learn your craft, and to kind of get your creative juices flowing, make sure that you're approaching this in the right way. But if you do get the chance to read for pleasure, what do you read? Do you have a go-to author? Do you try to read books in the same genre in which you write?
I honestly don't read for pleasure. I think that's one of the things about being a writer, for me at least. When I read something, I am taking it apart. I'm reverse engineering it. And so what I read is what I think will inform my next novel. So after finishing The Stolen Hours, my next novel takes place in the country, up in northern Minnesota, the Boundary Water Canoe area, that area. Mm-hmm. And so I'm reading Longmire. I'm reading Tom Franklin. I'm reading No Country for Old Men. I'm reading books that are country based and Clint Eastwood kind of character based, that kind of thing, because I want to soak that in as I'm writing the story. The next novel that I'm doing is going to have a little more of a family drama to it. So the last book I read was Lane Moriarty. So I'm reading books that have more of a family drama in it to see how other authors handle it, and again, reverse engineer the things that I think work, and avoid the things that I think don't work.
So, can you tell us which character gets the next story? Is that
Yeah, so
something?
Max Rupert, his book will be coming out next year. I've already submitted it to my editor. We're working on the revisions now. It is called Forsaken Country.
Okay.
Again, it's country based. It's Forsaken Country. So if you've read the Guys of Another, The Heavens May Fall, The Deep Dark Descending, there's an arc there where Max has to face his darkest nature, and at the end of The Deep Dark Descending, he goes to stand in a corner. Basically, he's in a cabin up north, and 3.5 years later, now I'm going back to visit him, and he hasn't cut his hair, he hasn't shaved, he's living kind of like a hermit up there, and something happens to bring him back into the world. The book I'm outlining that I'm going to start writing in January is for Bodhi Sandin as an adult. It'll be a legal thriller because he runs the Innocence Project, but it's going to have a component where the person that his client is actually in the security hospital, mentally ill and dangerous, having allegedly killed somebody. And so that's the one that I'm outlining now. And then the one that just popped into my head is another story for Joe and Lila. So there's always 2 or 3 stories circulating in my head at any given moment, but I try and put them all aside and focus on one at a time as I'm writing them.
So readers have a lot to look forward to.
And I'm like trying to write it all down. Like, okay, like what ones do I have to be on the lookout for?
And I get emails and Facebook and messages from people saying, hurry up and write the next Max novel, or hurry up and write the next Joe novel. I was like,
those readers are so demanding, aren't they?
That's the best I can do.
They want so much, right? But this would be the advantage for people coming to your stories late. Then they'll have 7 books to read.
Yeah.
Right. So when The Life We Bury first came out and they were, we want more. It's like, I have to write another one first.
You're like,
now
you got some other ones to tide you
out there.
over.
Go read those first and then come back and I'll have one for you.
Yeah, and we don't want you to dilute your stories.
No.
We want you to create these memorable characters, beautiful descriptions of place, and all the things that draw us into your stories.
And have we heard it right that you are dabbling in screenwriting?
I am dabbling, which means that I'm studying it on the side just for the fun of it. I've written some stuff, and because I have an agent, I've given it to my agent. Whether it goes beyond that is, I don't know. I'll write something, give it to my agent, go back to writing my novels, and if something happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But it's a different medium, and it's fun to try and understand storytelling from as many perspectives as possible. I cut my teeth in theater. I'm a novelist now, but writing screenplays is a very different beast. In a lot of ways, it's the same in terms of the storytelling, the importance of character and character development and arcs. But on the other hand, it's a visual medium. And so where I'm describing how the kitchen smells when Max walks into the kitchen, you don't see that. You don't have that from a screen. You can't smell. So it's it's dialogue based. You have a little tagline saying, here's where the scene is, here's what the scene looks like. Boom, now let's go into the dialogue. And it's teaching me a lot about writing better dialogue, I think. So I'm always trying to learn and grow.
We've talked with a few other authors, and one of the interesting things that we've touched on before is the immediate feedback that you get from your audience as an actor, for like theater. But you don't get that necessarily, as an author. You just put your work out there.
Yeah, there's that moment of adulation where the audience is applauding. that you never get over that. I don't think I never did. Whether it's in the middle of a show where you hear a roar of laughter because of something you did, or at the end of the show where you step out to take your bow, that's a real high. It really is, that you don't get from writing. Now, being nominated and receiving awards, that's about as close of a comparison as I can get. So when they announce your name at that award ceremony and you walk up to receive your award, that's a wonderful high as well. But it's at the same time, it's different because you're competing with other people and you think, well, they called my name and not yours, but man, you wrote a good book and it's just not fair. So where in theater, everybody gets applauded. So it's good.
I have just one more thought to share with you, Alan, is that, Kelsey and I work a public desk in a public library. And so for some immediate feedback to you, we know that a book has really resonated with the reader when they come to the desk and they say, what's next? I need the next book. That's...
Or does this author have anything else?
Yes.
Like they bring it up to us and they're like, okay, I finished this. Now I'm going to need something else by that same author.
And I will tell you that we get that a lot when people, are reading your books. They'll be like, what's next? What else is there?
That's good to hear.
Yeah. Well, we have really enjoyed talking with you today, Alan. Thank you for
thank
being
you so much.
Our guest on the first
Thank
50
you.
pages.
Is there a bookstore there in Siouxland?
Yeah.
Yep.
I try and support local bookstores as much as I can. And this year in particular, there's going to be issues with supply chain for books. So if people want books for Christmas, they should start seeking them out pretty soon. But yeah, anything that will help the local bookstores, I try and support.
For listeners who are interested in getting copies of Alan Eskens' books, you can find those at Book People, located in Sioux City.